the basic statement from the Disarm Now Plowshares and move into the new plans and what is going on, why, you know, the new sub. And I finish, my final quote is from international physicians: when there is no cure, the only sensible option is prevention. That, you know, there is no other choice. So, thank you, Your Honor. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in this court today. One of the things that is at the heart of our nonviolent core is assuring the safety of everyone there, not just the Ground Zero participants, but State Patrol, the drivers of vehicles, the Navy personnel, everyone. We have a very acute and deep awareness and appreciation of that. So the trained peacekeepers, in this case, always are on the watch. They move into the roadway when they determine it's safe. We develop a relationship with the authorities, even with the Navy, so that everyone is working together in a certain way, even though we have different purposes. And so there's a deep respect. That being said, yes, on August 6th, I joined with my fellow co-conspirators. Forget that bit of humor, that'll be the end of that. In what is really a symbolic action. I have delved into every possible way of trying to move our government to move towards disarmament, working with people in Washington, D.C., writing letters, visiting legislators, and I have chosen, in the case of working with Ground Zero Center, to pursue the means that are not as understood or accepted within the bounds of the law. Trident is truly a relic of the Cold War that ended quite a few years ago. Deterrence is a myth. The Navy is now planning Trident's successor and preparing right now to award contracts on that. 12 new ballistic missile submarines are planned to replace the current Trident fleet. This new fleet of submarines will, if the Navy is allowed to go ahead with its plans, will sail literally into the end of the century, which would be at least 70 or more years of Trident with its full complement of nuclear armed warheads. Besides the current life extension program that is refurbishing each and every W-76 thermonuclear warhead, that's a 100 kiloton warhead, and there are between 4 and 8 of those on each missile. The Navy is quietly planning the next generation missile that will sail into the end of the century. The longer our nation deploys the Trident nuclear weapon system, the greater the probability that the world will suffer from the effects of either accidental or intentional nuclear war. The probability of either one is great. Rather than engaging in good faith efforts toward disarmament, as is required under Article 6 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, to which the United States is a signatory, our nation continues to modernize every aspect of the Trident nuclear weapons system. So as an individual, I cannot sit quietly while this goes on. As a retired public health professional, I'm keenly aware of the medical effects of radiation, particularly from nuclear weapons, and the direct and indirect effects of even a single detonation of a W-76 warhead, the 100 kiloton warhead, and the Hiroshima bomb was 15. And literally, there are not enough burn beds in the entire world to deal with the effects on a single city, the entire world, just as a perspective. In recent years, we have learned that even a regional nuclear war using a small fraction of the world's nuclear weapons would cause irredeemable harm to the Earth's ecosystems and could kill 1 billion people from nuclear famine. For these reasons, I engaged with my fellow resistors on August 6, 2012, in a nonviolent action at Naval Base Kitsap in a symbolic gesture of closing the base, which is our deepest desire that one day this base will close, the Trident will be a memory, and the people working at that base will have other jobs that are for life and not preparing for death. This was an effort to carry out my moral and legal obligations for the benefit of current generations and generations to come. This is my legacy. In closing, I just want to quote the International Physicians for Prevention of Nuclear War that has stated, "When there is no cure, the only sensible option is prevention." Thank you for your consideration.
My view would be, we have to do this because otherwise nobody pays attention. And we're the tip of an iceberg, for example, that of lots of people in countries who think they're bad. You know, they around the world, they look at the United States and go, how come they have all these, but they say these bad people can't have one? But I'm also a little nervous because as a high school teacher, I'm not used to people listening. My father was in the Navy in World War II. He worked in the Code Bureau in Washington, D.C., breaking the Japanese code, helped save thousands of lives because we knew what they were going to do, and they didn't know that we knew that. And then Hiroshima and Nagasaki happened, and it completely changed his worldview. To him, war became impossible, immoral, and illegal because it would ultimately lead to much destruction. Because of that, my parents chose to raise us in a peace church, the Religious Society of Friends. I was raised as a Quaker. And one of my Sunday school teachers he and several friends sailed a boat into the Pacific test site in 1952, risking their lives in a nuclear explosion and trying to prevent one of the early hydrogen bomb tests. So that's really been an inspiration to me. I think it also makes the point that citizen action, calling attention to evil and what's right and wrong, what's illegal and is illegal, is very important. That action was a major spur to the anti-nuclear movement. And if it wasn't for the anti-nuclear movement, more countries would have them and they would have been used again. I disagree with a lot of my friends here. I wouldn't say Hiroshima and Nagasaki are good, but I think they had to happen because if they hadn't, people being what they are, nobody would understand that one of these bombs burned, crushed, or caused the bleeding to death of 70,000 people in one day and another 70,000 people in a year. That was Hiroshima. And since our government has a very strong military, if we didn't have evidence that these things would do such horrible things, I believe our government would have used more of them in Korea or maybe in Vietnam and justify military necessity. This is essential to understanding our state of mind, why we walk on the roadway and do something that seems idealistic, ridiculous, having no effect. And I think there's abundant evidence that it has had an effect, that there's a lot of countries where people stand up and do this. And there's a lot of countries that have had nuclear weapons and have had nuclear weapons that have gotten rid of them. What we're talking about is about a 130-year tradition of the leading nations of the world building up an ever-increasing amount of international and humanitarian law. It says even if there's war, there's certain things you cannot do. The Hague Conventions was one of the earliest ones that predated World War I. And part of it says it's prohibited to use weapons that cause unnecessary suffering on human beings. Probably Seattle is not a target of Russia's nuclear weapons. But Boeing Field is, because they're a major military producer and they produce guidance systems and radar and all that. If one nuclear bomb was dropped on Boeing Field, because it's a military target, it would kill most of the people in Seattle, because every military base in the world is near a population center. They would also hit Bangor. Obviously, that's a target. Any country that has nuclear weapons has other countries pointing their nuclear weapons at their nuclear base. So many, many thousands of people in Kitsap County would die if there was a nuclear exchange. And a country gets targeted with nuclear weapons for the specific purpose of trying to destroy them before they get used. So anyway, let's go to the next one. Next slide. Yeah, next slide. That's on here. So, as you all know, the Hague Conventions didn't prevent the use of poison gas in World War I, but they did in World War II partly. Yeah, this is it. I'll just go straight to World War II. The United States and the other allies in World War II started out condemning Germany and Japan for horrible crimes against international law, specifically the bombing of civilians and entire infrastructure to terrorize countries into surrendering. At the beginning of World War II, that was the position of the Allies. And by the end of World War II, the Allies were doing the exact same thing on a far more massive scale for the same reasons, to terrorize the Axis into surrendering. The United States has signed all of these treaties. There are other countries that have signed them and break them. But this is the only one where I vote and pay taxes. But the way nuclear strategy works, you don't use one of them, you use 100 or 300. Or you hit the enemy with 300 and then they still have 150 left to launch. So again, they're not only illegal, but I don't think anybody would pay attention to this if some of us didn't go out on the roadway. So do we have to stand in the roadway? Do we have to block people's right to get to work on time, commit a traffic infraction to uphold the Constitution and to save the world? I would say absolutely you have to. It's no fun for me, because my neighbors, I live right next to the base, my neighbors work there. My students go into the military. I teach nuclear weapons to people going into the military. And close on a personal note, my son grew up here. I've raised him to be a pacifist. He's taken a different course. He got a sociology degree, and our economy seems to have a lot of trouble generating good jobs that don't involve being involved in an industry that threatens to kill people. And he's married to a Silverdale girl, and he wanted a good job here. He finally got a job at the shipyard. One of his assignments is to help maintain the USS Pennsylvania, which is one of the Trident submarines that I'm trying to get rid of. So I'm very, very aware of how unpopular it is to hear this for local people. And even if we get rid of these weapons, it might cost my son part of his job or some of those positions. But my vision is that we have to get rid of these things, otherwise inevitably one will go off and everybody will go, well, why didn't you tell him? And our answer will be, we did, you weren't paying attention. But my vision is that he'll still have a job there, but that his job will one day be cutting up these Trident submarines, taking them apart and burying them so that the waste won't hurt anybody. I don't think he'd mind doing that. Thanks. Oh, I had one other thing to say. Because of this, I think you ought to reduce our fines to nothing. But if you have to fine us something, I think it ought to be 1 penny.
I think Judge used in the Plowshares trial was there was no threat or use, so there was no violation of international law. What are these people talking about?
Which, of course, is ridiculous.
Well, no, it isn't ridiculous. It's true.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Tom Rogers. I'm a retired Navy captain. I commanded an attack submarine during the Cold War. I've been responsible for nuclear weapons. I blocked the road last August to raise public awareness of the continuing deployment of nuclear weapons on board Trident submarines. Trident II D5 can attack virtually any point on Earth without warning within minutes of receiving an order to launch. In the late 90s, I taught operational law and the law of the sea convention to senior naval officers. And during that time, I attended a course on international law at the Naval Justice School in Newport. What I came to understand is that customary international law is a collection of treaties, accords, and conventions that nations generally adhere to in their dealings with one another. International law is not static. It evolves as international relationships change. There's no enforcement authority that has jurisdiction over the actions of a sovereign nation. If a nation violates international law, there's no consequence unless other nations choose to challenge the violation. And if no nation or body takes action, then over time it becomes understood that there is no consequence and the law becomes moot. If we can step back from the brink, if we can de-alert those weapons, I believe that nuclear disarmament is an achievable goal. In 2009, President Obama in Prague stated clearly and with conviction America's commitment to seek the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons. The election's over, and I hope he can get on with it.
I'd like to divide my comments into 2 parts. The first saying why I was at the base that morning, and the second is in regard to how I would hope that you might respond. So on the morning of August 6th this year, along with a good number of others, I went to the main gate area there at Kitsap Bangor Naval Base to vigil as workers were arriving at the base. My purpose was to remind them of the implications of their labors, to provide them with a moment to stop and think and perhaps reconsider what they were doing, or at least what they were contributing to. As a person of faith and conscience, I felt compelled to speak out against the maintenance of full nuclear readiness there at the base. The threat of use of nuclear weapons is illegal under international law, and having the Tridents out on constant deployment constitutes such a violation. Additionally, I feel that it violates moral and ethical laws and puts our own country and all others in great jeopardy, and it does nothing to make us more secure. As I look at you today, I recognize that you could be 100% in agreement with me theoretically, that nuclear war is wrong, that deploying these submarines is wrong, and that international law condemns it. And at the same time, you could be sitting here thinking, well, you know, I am here responsible as a judge in Kitsap County, and my job is to look at allegations of violations of Washington state law and deal with them. And that's it. And that's 100% understandable. And so what I'm saying here today comes from me very humbly and with deep respect, because I'm not sitting in your position. And yet what I want to say is that as long as all of us play by the rules, living within the guidelines we have for our particular profession or state in life, we are affirming the status quo, and nothing will change. As long as I vigil within the confines of the free speech zones set up near the main gates of the base, I will not have access to the authorities to whom the Nuremberg principles obligate me to address my concerns, and nothing will change. As long as the workers at Naval Base Kitsap Bangor, Navy personnel and civilians alike, continue to go to work every day and do what they do to make the Tridents continue to operate smoothly, nothing will change. And as long as you limit the scope of your professional activities, in this case, to judging whether or not we have violated RCW 4661-250, and if so, whether you will fine us the full $56 or something less, nothing will change. So today I invite you to consider these questions. What might happen if you stepped beyond your prescribed role as a Kitsap County judge and perhaps gathered some other judges together and went to the governor about your concern about what this base housed in your county is doing? What if you proposed to her that she speak with governors of other states and take the concern to the president? What if, instead of fining us, you deliberately abstained from imposing a sentence? I was present in a courtroom once when a federal judge did this very thing after hearing the case of some nonviolent protesters accused of and arrested for trespass. She ended up voluntarily leaving the bench after, I believe it was 11 years or 15 years, some long time on the bench, and going to seminary to go into some kind of Christian ministry. Her action, probably as much a surprise to herself as anybody else, totally transformed her, but she had gone outside the box on that occasion. What if you were to ask us to return home and send out a press release about what we did and how you responded? What if you simply dismissed the citations of all involved? I'm sure you're creative and can think of other possible responses. And again, I say that I present these questions to you humbly and with great respect, and with the thought in mind that international law is supposed to supersede local law, and the whole challenge of weighing that for a judge, what are you supposed to do with that, is beyond my comprehension. But I think the people who've spoken already have put a good handle on different aspects of the problem that's there. And so I just call on you to be willing to think outside the box a little bit to see if you can be a person to take a bold step. I'm simply inviting you and encouraging you to step back from business as usual and respond to your own inner voice as each of us has in coming here before you today. In conclusion, on August 6th, I was there at the gates of the base to speak out in conscience as I believe God called me to do. I could not have done otherwise. Today, in your response to us, you too, Your Honor, have the possibility of speaking out. I invite you to rise to the occasion. Thank you.
And George Rodkey. Before you start, just let me finish. I just was in the middle of taking some notes here. Just let me finish my thought.
A personal statement on violence and more philosophical, but it's not very heavy in the legal area, so
Okay.
it can go anywhere. Your Honor, I appreciate the opportunity to share a few thoughts with you today that bears on the thinking behind the action that I took on that day, August 6th. That trial did result in an acquittal by a jury, and it was based on the international law evidence that we presented. Looking back to my own history with this issue, I became fully aware of the Trident weapon system back in 1978. I was living in California and became acquainted with a man named Robert Aldridge. He was a former engineer at Lockheed Missiles and Space Corporation, Sunnyvale, California. And Bob explained the offensive nature of the Trident weapon system, which he had been initially involved in designing after a career working on Polaris and Poseidon missiles. Trident's short flight time, the high accuracy, and its ability to hide in the depths of the ocean ended up making it a much more destabilizing weapon. As at that time, Trident was and still is the most destructive weapon system ever to exist in human history. Soon after that, I attended a conference sponsored by Physicians for Social Responsibility in San Francisco, which there were many of them given around that time in the early 1980s, and they gave me a visceral, overwhelming sense of the capacity of nuclear weapons to destroy human life and the balance of nature. I remember coming out of one session of these eminent scientists describing these effects, going outside and just being emotionally overwhelmed, and a stranger came up to me and gave me comfort. It was a very, very powerful time. So this awareness gave me, and still gives me, the clarity that these weapons are personally for me in direct contrast to the Christian faith that I grew up with and embraced and now profess as an adult. The teaching of Christ is love of enemy, going the extra mile, returning good for evil, and suffering rather than inflicting violence on others. As a Roman Catholic, I stand in the tradition of those in that faith, like Dorothy Day, St. Francis, Thomas Merton, and all those who interpose their lives between danger and all innocent victims. These are the blessed ones who are called not peace lovers, but peacemakers. And I know that this belief has no real standing in a court of law, cannot be assumed or imposed, and that's not my intention. But I cannot help believe that our world would be a more livable place if it were more widely accepted. Those many years ago, when I was in court here, I had recently become a father for the first time. And my son Eli now is 15 and has a brother, Gabe, who is 12. And the need that I sense to take action for a more secure future for them has not diminished at all, nor has the need for me to become an example to them of a responsible adult. Now, being a father has vastly deepened my commitments substantially. So for me, the purpose of the action itself, standing in the middle of a busy highway, was to be an impediment to the normal flow of business that, as usual, at the Bangor base, and to appeal to the consciences of those involved in the Trident program there who were driving into work. I intended to symbolically close the base with my co-defendants and to disrupt, even if briefly, the tendency that all humans have to continue on a certain direction, even if it may be destructive or detrimental. I know that I appreciate it if other people in my life take that initiative with me and interrupt maybe some behavior that is not good for me, even if that is uncomfortable. But beyond the more symbolic approach and the personal effect, I think that we are acting as the tip of an iceberg of opposition to nuclear weapons, which has deep roots both in this country and growing in other parts of the world. We hear reports about various governments, Iran and others, and their attempts to gain nuclear weapons, but seldom do we hear about the growing non-governmental organizations and individuals who are acting to bring an end to nuclear weapons. So our acting is in part to be a catalyst for even greater change and initiatives. I think this is a reasonable expectation, because taking a personal risk like we did, standing in a roadway, obviously risking the law, the force of the law, gets people's attention like very little else does. It is my belief that love is at the beginning and end of our lives. It's the purpose for which we have all been created. It proceeds from a loving creator. It's more than the romantic human love, but goes to the heart of how all humans are meant to relate to each other. So the sooner we get our lives in line with this, you, me, all of us, the sooner we can face the threats to this way of living such as Trident, and the sooner we'll be living life on Earth as intended. Thank you.
I have been arrested many times at the Nevada test site in Las Vegas. I've been arrested at the Hanford base for protesting nuclear weapons. And now that I live in Washington State, it is only natural for me to come and protest against Trident. And my protest is long-standing. It is not religious-based. It is based on what I feel is the logic of my arguments. And I cannot understand why our government thinks these weapons are necessary. Firstly, any nuclear attack the US would launch would release a massive cloud of radiation that would encircle the Earth. It would poison every living thing. Secondly, Trident submarines loaded with deadly missiles patrol the oceans, causing other nations to fear and hate us. Thirdly, here at Bangor, our money is being used to build a new wharf to handle even more missiles. I can't understand why. The US is the only country in the world who has attacked using nuclear bombs, first in Japan, and now with so-called depleted uranium in Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm ashamed of this record, and therefore I will protest and continue to protest. Silence means consent.
Is it Michael Siptroff?
Yes.
Did I pronounce that correctly?
Good afternoon, Your Honor, and my fellow Ground Zero members. My opposition to war and preference for peace goes back many, many years. I grew up in Pennsylvania, as I will reference former President Dwight Eisenhower being from Pennsylvania. My resistance to war during the Vietnam War included going to Washington, D.C. and attempting to stop that war after President Nixon declared that he had a secret weapon to stop the war, and in fact expanded the war against international law. At that time, I was held illegally by my government, and the national troops there fixed bayonets lest we try to escape the Washington Armory into which we were held for 3 days. I was joining millions of fellow citizens to try to stop that war, but unfortunately, we didn't do it alone, but I do believe that we influenced President Nixon not to use nuclear weapons. Secret memoirs indicate that he had considered bombing North Vietnam. Unfortunately, ordinary farmers, even today, are still being killed and maimed by bombs which the United States dropped. Agent Orange devastated tens of thousands of Vietnamese, and one of my friends, a United States veteran, is now suffering from cancer created by the US's use of Agent Orange in that war. For many years, I refused to pay my federal income tax because 60% or more goes to current, past wars, or from the debts from wars. The IRS did not like my argument and said that I must pay or they would garnish my wages, leaving me with something like $300 in which to live. I couldn't afford that, so I paid my tax penalty and continued to pay my taxes. I almost lost my job over this principal state, but I thought it was worth it. I've been a member of many peace and justice organizations. I spend a lot of time in my community helping to make it a better place. One of the organizations is the Fellowship of Reconciliation, and we organize people of the United States to try to stop the United States' illegal action in support of the Contras, who were trying to overthrow the legitimately created government of Nicaragua. At that time, I was arrested for nonviolently sitting in my United States Senator's office, trying to persuade him to stop the Contras. When I went to get my Washington State teaching certificate, a bureaucrat thought that my nonviolent resistance made me unfit and a danger to children, and I should not be a teacher. Fortunately, my Washington State legislator, Cal Anderson, told that bureaucrat that I was a good person and I should have my teaching certificate. I have taught young children to resolve their conflicts without violence for decades. I have tried to say that it is much better to sit down and present what it is that you need from the other person and communicate nonviolently. I continue to do that to this day. On August 6th, when I took my action, I did so because one Trident submarine equals $3 billion, which would afford 50,000 teachers to be hired for 1 year. Well, at my school last year, we lost our librarians because we don't have enough money to pay for teachers. We lost our educational psychologist because we don't have money to pay for educational psychologists. Last year, of my 24 students, 12 of them were special needs students. I was never given anyone to help me in that classroom, even though 6 of those students the year before had met with our educational psychologist because they had things that were disturbing to them that interfered with their learning and other students' learning. As I was referencing President Eisenhower, he wrote his famous farewell address, warning us of the industrial military complex. Thank you, Malcolm. President Eisenhower, having been a commander and seeing the terrible effects of war, warned us that we would be well advised to get control of the war-making apparatus, or it would get in control of us. He cautioned that war and warmongering took up too large a portion of national life with grave ramifications for our spiritual health. Our culture has militarized considerably since Eisenhower's era, and civilians, not the armed services, have been the principal cause. From our lawmakers' constant use of support our troops to justify defense spending, to TV programs and video games that glorify violence, have made our children and our society quicker to respond by using violence. President Eisenhower knew very well about the trade-offs between guns and butter. And he said, I quote, "Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from them who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed," unquote. This unfortunate effect is still being felt. America's children are being denied great education. We still have too many homeless people, and in fact, the number of homeless are increasing. For 12 years, I worked in a school for homeless children. Their lives were thwarted because they were not given enough support. No place to live, had deep tears in their fabric of existence. The violence they saw on the streets hurt them deeply. I worked 3 years in a shelter for homeless women and children, many of those women fleeing domestic violence. There is a link between militarism and violence. Our society has become what Eisenhower had feared: too dependent on military solutions, too willing to spend for military expenses. We are, in fact, the generation that has been witness to Eisenhower's prophecy concerning the spiritual effects. It isn't by accident that my sign is somewhat rained upon, because I held this during the Martin Luther King demonstration when I was on the side, this free speech side. I held it during the Mother's Action on Mother's Day, and it did rain. I will hold it again because we need to know that we have a choice. We can well educate students, or we can build weapons of destruction. The choice is America's choice. The choice today, Your Honor, is to convict us of a technicality, in effect, for being in the roadway, or seeing that what we were doing is upholding international law, being responsible citizens, as has been mentioned today, under the Nuremberg and the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunals. More importantly, we are trying to prevent what our dear President Eisenhower said, and that is a society that will spend more for war than peace and then jeopardize our entire culture. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. And Elizabeth Murray?
Yeah, I guess I could point out that I am new to this, you know.
Yeah, right, yeah.
'Cause I
Just-
I
that's
thought
okay.
I had, and I don't know if anyone wants to incorporate this is, you know, if the judge or anyone says they have a problem with us walking in front of traffic and blocking it, you know, compare and contrast that to sort of an intrusive ad. You know, you're watching your favorite ball game on television, all of a sudden there's this commercial. Well, it's a public service message sometimes, and sometimes we need to be stopped in our tracks and made aware. And I'm Elizabeth Murray. Unlike many of my seasoned colleagues here, this is my first time doing any sort of action like this, so I'm a little nervous. I want to start out by telling you that I'm new to Washington State. I recently retired after serving 27 years as a political analyst with the Central Intelligence Agency. The last position I served there was as Deputy National Intelligence Officer for the Near East in the National Intelligence Council. Your Honor, I'm therefore keenly aware of the need to protect and safeguard our country. However, the past 10 years, especially since 9/11, have shown that it is time to embrace a new paradigm of strength through peace, peace including disarmament. My action, our action, on August the 6th, embodied my conviction that, as Gandhi said, we must be the change that we hope for in this world. Together with my brothers and sisters in this courtroom today, I hope for a new day when we will not ever consider the mass destruction of other humans as a means to solve our problems. That day, August the 6th, we raised awareness that a more civilized world is possible. And judging by the smiles and the thumbs up we received from the many employees driving into the base that morning, not to mention the kind and supportive demeanor of the State Patrol of Kitsap County that were there that morning with us, I firmly believe that such a transformation is possible. What an honor it is to stand before you today, for in this courtroom today could be the beginning of a profound sea change in how our society views and treats peace actions. Thank you, Your Honor.
I don't know where to begin. That's a lot to think about. Obviously, a lot of your statements are very thoughtful. You are a sector of society that is very passionate about those things that you hold dear, that you believe in. So passionate that you're willing to take steps like you did on that day, and I'm sure other days as well. Everybody's got a different ability to express himself or herself, but everybody that expressed themselves here today is very clear, very impressive expressions of your thoughts on the topic. And who can argue with a lot of your thoughts and your points about the folly of nuclear war? I mean, who can argue with that? If you're here to convince me, well, it doesn't take any convincing. I mean, nobody can, in their right mind, can argue with the notion. And the way that you described how, if such a thing were to happen, there wouldn't be any winner. There would be a person who started it, and then the end, I guess. I'm sure you've heard this before, but I'll say it anyway. Aren't we fortunate to live in a place where we can take these steps? We read about it in the paper all the time. People that protest their government and take steps are treated in ways differently than we are treated here in this country. We can take these steps, we can take political action, we can stand up in a courtroom like this and express our thoughts in a civilized way. And maybe there's other places in the world where people can do that, but I don't think there's too many places where we can express ourselves in this way. Now, I've chosen this profession because the courtroom is a place where disputes can be settled in a peaceful way. Order is kept. It's kind of boring sometimes, but it's better than the old way, where there wasn't a peaceful process to settle disputes. So how should I respond? I mean, somebody asked me, Ms. Lamb, I guess, how are you going to respond to all this? And this won't come as any surprise to you. I took an oath when I became a judge to uphold the law. And what I hear a lot of you saying is, oh, I really wish people would uphold the law. There's an international law. Why isn't somebody upholding that? We'll risk standing in the street. We'll risk getting arrested. We'll risk these things to express our belief. Why doesn't somebody uphold these laws, right? That's part of what you believe. And that's the oath I took, is to uphold the law. And what is the law that's before me today? I mean, you have raised over objection international law, Nuremberg Treaty, and other parts of international law. But the law that's before me today, this really gets boring and mundane, but the law before me today is this statute, this RCW 46-61-250. If I don't enter findings of committed, I think some people have suggested, why don't you just dismiss the cases? Well, if I do that, I'm not following the law, I'm violating my oath. And I'm not gonna do that. When I reach the point where I contemplate violating my oath, then it's time for me to leave. Like the federal judge that was described, it's time to leave. And I'm not ready to retire quite yet.
You'd be welcome at ground zero.
Part of being a judge is biting one's tongue. And so many thoughts go through my mind that are left unexpressed. Not negative by any means, but Ms. Lamb, if your goal here today was to provoke me to think, then you did. I mean, if that is part of your goal, is to provoke one guy here to think, you did achieve that. And I think it's right for a judge to be temperate in what a judge says while on the record, and not just say everything that I think. But I should say that we all have our own ways in how we express our beliefs about nuclear weapons, nuclear annihilation, escalation, and those issues. And they may not be the exact same way other people choose to express themselves and try to be convincing to others, but we all have our own ways. So now we get to the sort of mundane, boring part of my job. I can't say that nobody committed an infraction. Most of you admitted you did. So for a judge to contemplate an admission, it's like a plea of guilty, but it's not really, I agree I committed this infraction, and then conclude the person did not commit the infraction, well, that's absurd. So I can't do that. But I do have to reach this sort of mundane level, and at the same time bear in mind everything that you've come here to say. And you wanted a forum, and you achieved a forum. The world would be a better place if once we enter into these treaties with other nations, that we actually follow them. I'm way down from that level, but once we have a judge take an oath, wouldn't it be nice if the judge followed the law and abided by the law? So here's where it gets really boring. I'm setting all the fines at $25. Because I believe there are mitigating factors. Some people walk into the road, and other people walk into the road, and they're not all the same set of circumstances, and your set of circumstances is such that I find it to be mitigating, and so the fine is reduced from whatever it was, $56 to $25. So I think I'm done talking. But I know I'm done because I reached the end of the page. I appreciate everybody coming here today and expressing yourself in the way a court is meant to be used, in a peaceful way. And would you all please then talk with Rosie for a minute, and she'll tell you what to do next. We'll be at recess.
Please rise.
Okay,
We're
so-
persuasive for you too.
All of you can come up. I've got your case numbers and the $25 you can pay today in room 106, or you have up to 2 months to pay.
Can I ask a question for all of us?
Absolutely.
What happens if some of us feel that paying this fine is a violation of our conscience and refuse to pay?
There's a process that we go through. It gets selected for collections after the 2-month period.